The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Phil Goff.
Leader of the Labour Party, but for how long? Good morning, Phil. How are you?
G'day, Wammo. I'm good. Yourself?
Very well, thank you. However, John Key wishing you a very, very unhappy New Year, saying that you're going to be rolled in the New Year because you're riding so low in these polls that keep coming out.
Yeah, well, he's dreaming. He should focus on doing his job and let me do mine. There's no prospect of that, but that's just a little bit of politics.
But he'd like to say that he has a job and you don't.
Well, I have a job. It's probably the worst job in Parliament, being Leader of the Opposition, but that's just the nature of it. Look, we're out there, we're fighting for the things that we believe in. The government, strangely enough, when you have a major problem in New Zealand like we've had, first of all with the Christchurch earthquake and then Pike River disaster, that gives the government and the Prime Minister the chance to be seen, to be statesmanlike. It gives them high profile. And he's taken advantage of that. I'm not criticising that, but that's just the nature of things.
Are you saying, Phil, that he's orchestrated some of these terrible events around the country?
No, I wouldn't say that for a moment. I mean, I'm sure he, along with everybody else in New Zealand, felt devastated by those particular disasters. But I know from our time in government, when we had the tsunami in 2004, that gives the government the chance to act and to be seen to act, and any reasonable government will take advantage of that.
It's the American thing, isn't it? You've got to keep the population in fear, don't you?
Yeah, well, I don't. That's not my style of politics. I think what it ends up though is when you come to a time when you make a decision about your government, you look at how the actions of the government have affected you in a reasonably personal sense. So you say, well, is my job more secure now than it was before? Am I doing better? Are my wages going up faster than prices? Do I really want the government to sell off the state assets and continue to sell New Zealand land overseas? Those are the sort of things that I think when the public focus on the election campaign next year, they'll be thinking about.
Okay, well let's look at an issue that is people are just sort of starting to wake up to this morning, even though it was in the papers yesterday. But I noticed the main television media decided to ignore it yesterday. The WikiLeaks cables that refer to New Zealand, and it looks like under Labour. Or no, actually it wasn't under Labour, it was 2009 that New Zealand started to have a closer relationship, in fact, back to a very healthy relationship pre the nuclear disagreement. Everything's back on with the US, but it went and happened in secret last year.
Yeah, what happened, the presidential directive is still there, so, things aren't back to pre-nuclear. But they probably are moving in that direction, and they have been probably for most of the last decade. What happened last year was that the remaining exclusion on one part of sharing of intelligence information was lifted. New Zealand works closely with 4 other countries in sharing intelligence. And I'm in support of that.
Were you told about that?
Yeah, well, I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I knew that was happening. We don't go out and volunteer statements about intelligence usually.
But why is it such a secret?
Well, because intelligence is something that's usually confidential and is reasonably sensitive. But it is something that this country needs to do. We live in a world where commercial espionage is much more common than most New Zealanders would realise, where there's the potential for terrorism, where problems like drug smuggling and people smuggling are real issues, and therefore you do cooperate with other countries to share intelligence information. That's in our interests, and it's in the interests of the well-being of the world as a whole. But there is a sensitivity around that, which I respect in opposition, and I expect the other side to respect when they're in opposition.
Who controls the thing is with all this, because you hear about those, the files that came out from the SIS about people like Keith Locke, who was watched by the SIS for many years, and they kept a file on him, pried into his private life and stuff. He's not a terrorist.
No, and to be fair to the SIS, they've stepped back from that.
Have they, though? How do we know?
Well, yeah. I mean, operationally, I don't know what happens
Exactly.
at the ground level, but that's one reason. We've got this new legislation in Parliament that extends the ability of the SIS to collect information that's transmitted electronically. Now, I'm not against that, but what I am against is the fact that the Prime Minister wanted to have that legislation and the submissions on it heard in secret. And I've said to the Prime Minister, directly, face-to-face to him and in the House, that's just not appropriate. These changes may be necessary, but let's do it openly so that the public can have their say on it, they can be heard to have their say on it, we can respond to any public concerns there are, and therefore there would be much more likely to be buy-in from the public if they knew exactly what was going on and why. But if you shroud it in secrecy, then people will think the worst of what you're trying to do. Now, I'm still confident that I can change his mind on that. I just think it's a dumb thing to have public submissions not heard in the open before the committee so that the public can see what's going on.
The leaked cables also show that there was a definite pro-national as opposed to pro-Labour stance from the US.
Well, I think that's right. They saw National as being very much pro-American, and Labor's position is, of course, we're friendly with the United States, similar institutions, values, etc., but we're also a sovereign, independent country, and we're fiercely proud of our independence, and we're not going to sacrifice our judgment to any other country. Now, that's the difference between Labor and National. We may end up doing things from time to time, working quite closely with the Americans, as we did after 9/11 in Afghanistan. But we're not going to sacrifice our judgment, as John Key would have done over sending troops to Iraq, which was his position at the time. Labor made its own decision on that, and we were proven right by history.
Because they say that Labor was slow at embracing a new defence relationship proposed in 2007.
Well, we're keen. I was Minister of Defence at the time. We're keen to work with the United States, but we're also keen not to be locked into an alliance that would lead to expectations that we would automatically do whatever we were asked. We reserve the right to make our judgment on what's good for the world and what's good for New Zealand and what New Zealanders actually want. Whereas I think the national government, whether it's with China or with the United States, they're more likely to go along and not indicate disagreement when it occurs. China over the Dalai Lama, America over Iraq. Labor has always been more independent in its foreign policy making, and I think the New Zealand public appreciates that.
Phil Goff, hey, thanks very much for your time.
Okay, mate. Catch up with you next week.
All right.
Cheers, mate.
That is Phil Goff, leader of the Labor Party.